Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I've got my new friend Ken here, and Ken is a mutual friend of mine from Australia. It's so nice to see you. Now, you're not living here. You're just here visiting your friend Alan, right?
Yeah. I come from Australia and come backwards and forwards probably 3 or 4 times a year to the Philippines. Been doing that since the 1970s.
1970s, wow. The country, I assume, has changed a whole lot since the 1970s, right?
It has, yeah, indeed. And I'd say for the better too. You know, it's definitely the infrastructure and the place has become more developed and getting up to speed.
Now, you have a really interesting profession. You deal in antiques. Now, have you been doing that your whole life, or is it something you got into later on in life? Or
No, I've probably in my early 20s. I really started to get professional in buying and selling antiques and just studied it. And I was an engineer with Qantas originally.
Oh.
And then left that and...
aeronautical engineer? Or?
Yeah, aeronautical, yeah. Working on the 747s and that.
Wow.
And then I left that and went to become an antique dealer. But during that time, I was buying and selling and wheeling and dealing on the side.
Now, isn't it difficult to know what something is worth and know whether it's genuine, know whether it's been altered or not? Like, I remember, like back in the '60s, my father used to collect antiques in America, and the first thing he would do, like he bought a table or an old radio or something, he'd sand it all down and refinish it and made it look beautiful. But apparently, you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes the wrong way of restoring things can certainly diminish the value and, find that you've really made a very big mistake. You've got to have things done the right way. Certainly when restoring anything at all, they've got to be done the right way. I deal a lot in Japanese swords and I see a lot of people that have, get a sword and try and restore it themselves. And unless it's done properly, and you can actually ruin the blade.
There's a lot of fake swords out there too, isn't there? That they look just like the real thing, unless you really know what you're looking at. Don't you have to take the what's it called the
scabbard, the hilt?
Yeah, the hilt. You got to take the hilt off, and isn't there numbers or signatures and stuff inside of there?
Well, there is. That's true. Some swords. It's usually the swordsmith that's signed his name under the blade, under the tang they call it, which is the part that goes into the hilt of the sword. And sometimes they're not signed, but there's other characteristics to tell whether it's a genuine handmade sword or it's a fake.
What's the name of that type of seal that where it's folded over again and again and again and pounded and
the process?
Yeah,
that is the way they do it. Usually, I mean, when making a sword, if you commission a swordsmith to make a sword, he'll probably firstly gather the iron from the mountain and wherever he sources it from. And then he might pray for a day, and then he'll wash himself for another day, and then he'll start the forging, and start folding the metal over and stretching it out, and then folding it over and then stretching it out, and then finally shaping it and casting it into a sword, hammering it into a sword.
How long does it take to actually make a really high quality one? Like going back to an antique one I'm talking about.
Well, because it's a process of time, they leave it. Sometimes for example, if you commissioned a swordsmith to make a sword, it could take 6 months to a year to make. And you might be on a waiting list.
Wow.
So there might be many, it depends how busy the swordsmith is.
And what's something like that cost?
Well, it depends on the fame or the recognition of the swordsmith. If he's a famous swordsmith, which there are some still doing swords in Japan, it could probably take you up to 3 or 4 years.
But what's it cost?
Depends on the
what's a good one?
Well, you could spend anything from 10 grand to probably $50,000.
Really?
Yeah.
For a sword?
Big money, yeah. Indeed, anything that's like Imperial National Treasures and things like that, antique swords, can be worth up to $1 million.
So like a samurai sword, is this worth more than that was actually owned by a samurai and can be proven that it was a samurai sword? Is that worth more?
Well, all samurai swords, only samurai, it's a class structured society, and only samurais are allowed to have a sword of the long sword, over 27 inches in length, and that sword can only be carried by him legally. So they're the most collectible ones. The smaller ones, next size down, is the medium-sized sword, which is the wakizashi, and then the smaller dagger style, called the tanto.
Can you tell if a sword's been used in like combat by just looking at it?
Well, certainly some swords have characteristics of where they've actually been used in battle, where you see little marks on the back of the blade, and then on the high side. Sometimes they're chipped because they're so brittle. You know, if they actually go from blade to blade, they'll
break. Huh?
they won't break, but they'll chip. They can break. They can break. Yeah. So it can diminish the value of the sword because when they chip on what they call the harmon, or the temper line that goes up the edge of the sword, and that's naturally when it hits another hard surface just as hard, it can actually break the sword or chip it badly that the sword can be of lesser value.
Now the actual samurai, these men that were samurais, when did that end? Is it still going on?
It ended in the Meiji period, where...
What year was that?
Well, that was in the late 1880s. And this was the time when the Japanese came from being a feudal society to a modern society. So that was when they changed the army over. So they actually formed an army of a modern style that we knew, whereas before it was all clans and groups throughout Japan.
So what other kind of items do you specialize in? Do you sell?
All generally, mainly small items. Antique toys, antique coins, military items. Yeah, too numerous to mention, I suppose.
So mostly small stuff. You don't like furniture, like things like that?
Furniture, sadly, now it's gone off the boil. It's changed a lot because what happened is now our society's changed as far as lifestyle. So big furniture items, big chests of drawers and tables and big dining room accessories, chiffoniers, and sideboards and that sort of thing aren't as desirable as what they once were in the 1980s.
You know, like in America, a lot of guys my age, I'm in my 60s, were really into the custom cars, you know, not antique cars, but cars from like the 1960s and 70s, even like some of them even to the 50s. And they buy these cars and fix them all up and drive them. But the thing is, those guys are getting older now, they're dying off, and now they're selling those cars off, and the market's gone way down because the younger people that grew up in, like, say, the 80s, they don't want to have a car from the 1960s. They don't really care about it, as cool as those cars are. And so the market's really dropped down. Do you find the same thing as certain antiques where the generation that was interested in them is gone? Yeah,
look, mate, there's no doubt about it. In antique collectibles, whether they be cars or any sort of antiques, as the passage of time goes on, there's some things that were collectible and of interest in the 1960s and 1970s when I first started dealing, and now a lot of those things are off the board. There's other things that have jumped into their priority as far as demand concerned.
In America, back in the 90s, people were collecting Beanie Babies. I don't know if you even know what a Beanie Baby is, but they're like a little stuffed beanbag bear.
Yeah.
And these women were going crazy over these things. The first time a new one would come out, they'd run to the store in lines and fight over them and buy them. And there was one like the Lady Diana bear, and it was purple and had a little tag on it. And you see them on eBay for like $6,000, $7,000. And then, of course, now the markets fall out of those, and like you can buy boxes of them for like $30, you know, brand new ones.
I suppose if you want to use an example of that type of collectible, the most famous one would be the Ken and Barbie dolls.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, they were sort of boomed around the world. And then there's all the bands, the famous bands in the world that have all their paraphernalia and collectible items that they, you know, the Kiss and dolls and all these different ones there. But, of course, the most important thing is to have any of those sort of items is to keep the boxes, keep the original receipt, and, you know, that all adds to the value, and certainly the condition.
Yeah,
have them unplayed, you know, unplayed with, you know. You can have these older items that, but if they're in bad condition, the price is diminished substantially on them.
Most toys get, like I used to have the GI Joes, and they'd get played with, get destroyed. Boys just beat their toys up and break them.
Yeah. Well, like Matchbox toys
I
and
remember, yeah.
Dinky toys, or those English die-cast ones that were very, very popular and very sought after. The collectors have, sometimes in some items, the collectors actually become rarer
Yeah.
than
That's what I mean, yeah.
than
Yeah.
the items that we're dealing in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, comic books and baseball cards. I've never seen how, like, a baseball card that was 5 cents, back in the 60s or whatever, and now all of a sudden worth thousands of dollars. And it's only worth what somebody else is willing to pay for it.
Yeah, indeed.
It's not like if you took that, when I look at an antique, I think of something, or a painting, especially art, I'd say, okay, if I could take that item and I put it in a museum 100 years in the future, and someone who's never heard of whoever made that, and they saw the wow, as an incredible item, incredible painting, I would pay a lot of money for that. But if it's only valuable because you collect Pokemon, you collect baseball cards, you know who that guy is.
Yes.
I think it loses some of its value in the future.
Yeah. So as far as collecting items of for investment, I think they're probably not the best things to collect, in the sense that the fashion changes all the time. So what's in demand today might not be tomorrow. So what you might collect as a younger man, later on in life, it's
Right.
good to be. If you're only doing that for investment, you should certainly be. If you're going to do that, go down that road, you should be diverse.
You really got to know what you're doing, and then of course how easy it is to sell it. If like you got something that's valuable, say it's a sword or whatever, you need the money. Like how quickly can you sell it to get your money out of it?
That's right. Well, I suppose the auction houses around the world, and because everything's online these days, it's easy to keep a good thermometer on what you're collecting, and certainly if you see a thing which is or an item which is strong in value today, but sort of starting to falter and diminish. One thing that comes to mind that used to, when I first started dealing, was porcelain dolls, antique porcelain dolls. I mean, there was such a strong fraternity of ladies that were always seriously collecting those. And, I've even had some of them nearly have fights in my shop to buy them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd buy them in an estate and bring them into the shop, and they'd see them there, and But now they're off the boil. Their dolls are not as popular as they once were. And indeed that came from a lot of ladies too. They brought out a system where ladies were making their own, doing reproduction ones. So that also affected the price.
Yeah, I have daughters, 21 and 29, and when they were born, they're in England, and when they were born, a lot of my wife's friends gave them these porcelain dolls, really nice ones in the box and everything, and they had no interest in them at all. Even like today, they don't even want them. They just not interested in them. So
yeah, with doll collectors and women that look at them, they either love them or they see them as like little dead people. Don't have any appreciation them for all. But certainly England, I would say, is the hub. Probably England and probably the west coast of America. Is the strongest part of the world for the hub of where the antique values and trends come from.
what is some of the most rare, exciting, valuable things that you've discovered? Like when you're out searching to buy things, have you ever found what's a real treasure that you found?
But I do a few talks at different charities and things like that, and in my career, the most valuable things, the most interesting things, have been probably like yourself, Mark, of the people that I've met, the personalities that, not necessarily the articles, because they're only really tokens of life, but I suppose when you're a dealer, you have a good broad knowledge or a working knowledge of every aspect of the trade, but you're probably strong in probably 3 or 4 fields, specialise in 3 or 4 fields of that trade, where you take a personal interest in it too, where your heart is in it as well. But I think that you have to have an to be a dealer and also a serious collector. You have a person that's appreciation of the the arts in general, and love
Well, give me an
everything.
example. Like when you're out, I assume you go different places looking for things, estate sales, whatever. And give me an example of something like you found a real treasure. Said, "Oh wow, I can't believe that's sitting there, and I can buy it."
Well, yeah, it happens for sure. There's things that you sometimes buy that I suppose the things that you get most excited about if it's got good provenance.
Okay.
For example, you could have reflecting on your background, if you have a picture, a postcard picture of a ship,
Right.
and it might be worth $5, but because it's an old ship from the 1920s. But if you had a postcard with a ship and it had the Titanic on it, and somebody had written on it and it had been actually posted, there's your treasure, because it's got that provenance, it's got that history. That's really exciting, and it's of historical importance and interest.
Well, tell me something exciting that you found, an item that you.
Well,
probably
probably
a real fond memory you have of
okay.
something you found.
The most, I suppose it goes to the most valuable thing. The most valuable thing I found was a $50 slug, which was a $50 American coin, a gold coin about the size of a crown,
Wow.
big size of a silver, like a silver dollar size.
Where'd you find that at?
Came out of an estate in Sydney, and
In Sydney.
In Sydney, yeah. This particular man went into a nursing home and retired, and he left it to his wife, and she was also retiring, and she decided to sell it, and he'd been given it to her by an uncle in Florida, and when he was over there on one time on a holiday, he says, "Keep this. This was something that was from the pre-Civil War."
Wow.
And he kept it, had it all his life. Then he passed on his wife, and it ended up, everything ends up in Sydney. I mean, there was plenty of Americans certainly come to Australia. Even in the Civil War, I remember there was a ship there. One of the ships that called into Melbourne, and there was a lot of volunteers, Australian volunteers, went in and actually enlisted for the South.
I didn't know that. For the South, huh?
For the South, yeah.
Interesting.
There was lots of them, yeah. I think during that time, and then afterwards, there was a lot of Americans came to Australia for the gold rush, when we had the gold rush in the 1850s, 1860s, and after the American Civil War, and during that time. Well, probably to escape the Civil War.
Yeah.
It was 1867, wasn't it? So, we've had a fair bit of contrast between nations even 100 years ago.
I imagine like American gold coins might be scarcer and a little more valuable than ones from other countries, because wasn't it like 1933 that Roosevelt confiscated all the gold coins? It was illegal even to own them, any kind of gold, unless it was jewelry. And they melted a lot of them down.
It was illegal. I think that was the time when everybody in America buried them.
Yeah, they buried them or whatever. So, the ones that survived the 30s, were probably worth a little bit more, or hard to find, huh?
Yeah, well, numismatics are very strong, coin collecting, right throughout the States, and they've got some very, very important fairs that where they show up a lot of historical items, and you've got the population to support it, so there's a lot of collectors in those millions that you have.
So what country, like if you're going to go antiquing, looking for things, do you mostly look in Australia? Do you ever go to Europe and search there? And also, what about the laws? Like certain countries can't, like for example, you found an antique sword that was very valuable, that was a few hundred years old. Can you legally take it out from one country to another?
Yes. Well, most Western countries anyway, there's no trouble unless it has some historical importance. Like, for example, you couldn't take, if you found a gold statue in Egypt, you wouldn't be able to take it out of Cairo. But if it's just an ordinary, like a little lamp, a little clay lamp or something like that, there's no trouble.
Those are legal, huh? Because you've been to Israel, right? You were talking about going to Israel the other day. I assume there's a lot of, old things there to buy. Did you buy things in Israel?
No, because there's a lot of fakes.
A lot of fakes?
A lot of fakes, yeah.
I've been to Egypt and saw a lot of things, and I assumed a lot of it was probably fakes. And
they're just made for the tourists, assemblies. But, it's only things that, like in Australia, probably the only thing I know is a Victoria Cross. That's the highest medal that you can get awarded. They're illegal to take out of Australia. So it's got to have national interest or national importance.
And it's not necessarily the age of something that makes it valuable. Like, for example, an artifact from Egypt or Samaria or wherever, where say it's 5,000 years old, it's a little funeral statue or something like that, may not be worth as much as like something that was made a few hundred years ago. It's like age doesn't necessarily equal increased value. Is that right?
Well, it's very hard. The thing is with fakes, when they make them against real ones, it sometimes diminishes the value of the real one because it's not unique to own. You can have something,
Right.
a facsimile or something that's similar to own, so it does affect it. And as I was talking to some other colleagues, it's getting harder and harder to detect fakes because the manufacturers and with technology can reproduce them even better and better. They're
What's
making better
what's the
bakes.
most common thing that's faked?
These
Coins?
days,
Yeah.
coins, watches. So the buyer beware. You really have to have some. If you're going to spend some serious knowledge, if you're spending $30 or $40, well, I suppose it doesn't matter so much. But if you're spending any serious amount of money, thousands of dollars on an antique, indeed you want to be sure that you're not getting ripped off. You want to know that you're buying the genuine, real McCoy item.
How about artwork? Do you ever deal in like paintings like by Picasso or things like that, or is there a lot of those around? And
Well, in Australia, and I can only judge on art there, the paintings that we see that are in high demand are probably from Australian artists, Australian colonial artists, maybe some artists from the 1960s and 1970s. And indeed, that's another thing that's changing, When I first started dealing, a lot of early Australian artists, beautiful country scenes and things like that were very high in demand and bringing serious prices. Artists from the 1930s, 1920s and early 1900s now have subsided a little bit. A lot of people are going for more abstract, bright colour.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that the one who can paint the best topographical scene of a view. It's somebody that can, have an image of something which is, bright and sort of startling.
Some antiques, or antiquities, if you find something, is like say you find something in America when you're there, or here in the Philippines, is it ever like you find something that's worth less in the country that you bought it in, but if you take it back to Australia or you take it to England, it's worth a whole lot more.
Well, indeed, because I mean, if you found, for example, an American antique here that had some historical and interest in it, it would be worth more back in the States than it would be in the Philippines because there's more collectors, there's more demand for it, there's more interest for it, and the collectors can get their hands on it. So it's the same in Australia. If you had anything that was from the colonial days and you sell it in America, you might get US dollars for it, but it wouldn't have the same interest and following.
Right. So, do you do most of your collecting in Australia, or do you actually travel into other countries looking for things?
Yeah, anywhere I go, I sort of keep my weather eye open for anything that. But it's hard. It's harder now because
There's a lot of people looking now for Antique Roadshow, things like that. A lot of people out there looking for things.
There is.
The treasures.
there is people are more aware, and it's probably because of the internet.
Yeah, the internet.
They can sort of look at something and then Google it and find out about it. Whereas before, we had to refer to reference books and rely on our knowledge.
Do you ever find things where someone's selling something, a private seller, not necessarily a collector, but a private seller is selling something and they don't know what they've got, and you do? Like they're asking a small amount for it, and what do you do in that situation?
Well, put it this way: it's always best to be honest, and you try and give them a fair price where you can make something on it. You know what I mean? Because if that person finds out later on, your reputation will be affected.
Right.
And in the small community, it's better that you say, well, that Ken Buxton, he done the right thing. He gave me a good price. It was a fair deal. He made something on it, and I'm happy to refer somebody else. So you go on referral. So
Right.
So to rip that little old lady in the short term might be beneficial to you, but in the long term it can work against you very much so.
Well, what do you have to do if you find something like, in retail business, you try and find something, you want to be able to sell it for 100% more, like double the price to make a profit, because you've got all your other expenses. Does it have to be there somewhere close to that in order to make it worthwhile to even buy it?
Well,
Because you got to hold on to it in your shop for a while.
The antique business doesn't necessarily work on a specific margin.
Yeah.
So you might buy something for $1,000 and know that you can turn it over for $1,200 the next day if you've got somebody. So you can pay a premium on it. Yeah, you've got a buyer for it. So the secret is, I suppose, of an antique dealer is to be able to source his goods and have a method of keep on getting new stock, and then have a good record of your collectors, so people that you know that you can ring up and say, George, I've got exactly what you're looking for. That toy pedal car that you've been dreaming about, been asking me for 6 months for, I've got one.
Got it.
Come and have a look at it. You know what I mean? It's a beauty.
Yeah.
Here's a picture of it. What do you think?
Yeah.
And you get excited as they do with their enthusiasm.
Now, you say you started doing this in your 20s.
Yeah.
Has your taste and the way you buy things changed since then? Because I would think if you're in your 20s and you see an item and you say, wow, I know that's going to be worth something in the future. I know that's the type of item that 10 years now is going to be worth a lot more money. But now you're an older man, so do you say, okay, I'm willing to buy and hold things, or you want to look at things that you think will sell right away?
Well, because you're buying and selling, you're not looking into the future in the sense that you're buying something that you know there might be something left, there might be a little bit meat left on the bone for you, so you're quite happy to pay a premium on it and buy something for $500 and sell it for $600. Well, that's certainly how I work now. You know what I mean? And usually you can buy better privately, or sometimes you get a bargain at auction. But if you're buying off a friend or something like that, well, you just make something. Just to.
Do you ever buy things just for you? Like it's for me,
Indeed,
and
I do.
I'm going to keep it till the day I die. I'm not going to sell it to anybody.
Yeah. Well, I've got plenty of POWs or prisoner of wars.
So give me an idea of some of the things you just will not sell in your lifetime.
Well, I've got a few. Look, I've got an eclectic selection of things. I like statues. I like figures.
What kind of statues?
I like bronzes. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a few bronzes that I like. They're not fantastic ones, but they're just ones that I like.
Do you like? Yeah.
I've got Japanese swords, a few Japanese swords that I like. I've got a few of everything, and they're not necessarily the most valuable, the best ones that are sought after. They're ones that I appreciate and find some pleasure in and feel comfortable living with.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the secret of collecting is. Not necessarily the most valuable things, the most rare, things that give you the most pleasure. Because this is a pleasure business. You buy it for your own personal, appreciation.
Yeah, you can just take it out and appreciate it, and all the work that went into making it and how rare it is and everything.
And if you pick the right things to collect, well, indeed, you see it going up and up in value. But then that's a bad thing in the sense that if you pick something that's expensive, that's very popular, it becomes more and more expensive. So you've got to pay more and more and more for the new items that you
How about books? Do you ever buy like rare books? Because I know what's happening. I was in the art business for a little while, and I knew a very wealthy collector. What he would do is he'd buy these rare books that had like etchings in them that were, say, by Rembrandt, or etchings that were by colored lithographs that were by Chagall or Salvador Dali. Beautiful leather-bound book, like a Bible, for example. Yeah. And they cut the book up and cut the pictures out and then sell them individually. Oh, yeah. And they were outbidding everybody at these rare book auctions to break the books up, which to me sounds sad.
Yeah, well, indeed, I agree. I never ever break books up, but books have got to be of a historical note. I mean, because of internet, generally books in general aren't sought after. So books that have got to be of interest and collectible. Certainly, books are very old in nature. More than 100 years old. And
the condition, I guess, is everything.
Condition is very important, to have their jackets on them, to have the plates, not to have the corners damaged on the thing. But you get early books around the 1600s and 1500s, and they can be. But they're the sort of things that we don't see in Australia because we were whipping convicts until the 1850s, and then the country sort of begun. But and we don't have the history and age to have that. But course, you know, Europe's a place where you see all these amazing books, you know, leather bound and, you know, handwritten and, you know, or by crude forms of printing, you know.
Do you ever think back of like when you were a young man, things you could have bought, everyday items that were just like, for example, vinyl records or, you know, different things that like were just so cheap, you know, you said comic books, you know, whatever. And you think, God, I wish I would have bought a whole bunch of those and just put them in a box somewhere and kept them.
Well, yeah, of course there's things that you think that if you're sort of snowed away, but, you know, growing up, you know, as a small businessman, I had a family as well. You just couldn't keep everything. You know, the best things you always kept for your customers and collectors. But yeah, there's certainly things. Probably, yeah, there's too many things too numerous to mention to think that you should have. But many things that I had, anything that I had that I really loved, I kept. Yeah.
Well, okay, so right now, as an antique expert and dealer, what can you think of right now that's brand new? Any item at all that in the future is going to be considered a priceless antique?
The first thing that comes to mind are Rolex watches.
Oh.
Rolex watches, at the moment, they're enjoying a phenomenon. I mean, for example, those Jubilee ones, they dates of the 1960s and 1970s and 80s that we were selling for $2,000 and $3,000 are now bringing up to $10,000.
Wow.
In good condition with a box and papers. You know, all these little things. Watches now is probably the new thing, you know, the new popular thing that comes to mind that's probably one of the strongest interests. And it's appreciated not only in Europe, it's very strong in Asia and indeed in America, yeah.
So you buy a good one and keep all the papers and everything in the box and maybe just stuff it away.
Yeah, indeed. It's nice to keep the box and the papers and keep them in good condition, keep the watch in good condition, the receipt, even the bag, history of where you bought the store, you know.
Picture you buying it.
Yeah, all that appertains to it, you know. I mean, there's a famous clip on YouTube you can see on the guy who gets he bought this watch in Vietnam on his first week's pay. He was a Vietnam vet.
I saw that.
Yeah, you saw it?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it was like he paid like $700 for it or something like that, you know?
Yeah. And I forget what the actual watch was. I think it was an Amiga. And he resold it.
Wow.
He took it to the roadshow, the antique roadshow.
I think it was a Rolex, I remember right.
It was a Rolex, was it?
Yeah.
I forget that's what it was.
He bought it in the PX.
Yeah. And he was blown away with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know why. He just looked like an ordinary sort of a guy. But he was wise enough to keep the papers, the receipt. He had the box, and I think he even had the wrapping paper.
Wow. So anything else besides watches you can think of if you were collecting for the future?
Look, anything that's of a visual nature, anything that's of interesting looking, that's decorative, is maintaining strong appeal. Anything that pertains historically to your country, as far as colonial things, is still got strong interest that can be of a decorative nature.
The thing about antiques is like a lot of them were handmade by craftsmen who the skills are lost, and today like so many things are manufactured in factories, and even the quality things are made mass produced. And so I imagine their collectability in the future is not going to be the same because there'll be thousands of them around there.
Yeah.
It's like cars, for example. You know, I can't think of any car right now that's out there that'll be, you know, collectible in the future. Maybe a Corvette.
Well,
I don't know.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I mean.
And if we go to all electric cars, you won't be able to drive the damn things.
You talk about cars. I mean, when in the 60s and 70s, there was the vintage cars of 1920s and 1930s that we couldn't wait to get our hands on. I mean, they were the ones in demand, and the night cars of the 1950s, 1960s were just old bombs. Any of those old Ford Custom lines and, you know, 57 Chevs and, you know, the Bel Airs and all that. They were only, you know, old, what we used to call yank tanks from, you know, like diminishing, full of rust. But now they're, of course, hot property now. So it's true what you say. It's a bit of an age trip, whereas guys of an older age can afford to have those sorts of cars and indeed pay to have them restored, because restoration work and
Oh, it's crazy expensive.
can be cost a fortune.
But then they're
so-
getting, like, when they get into their 60s and 70s, they want to sell because their son, who like might be in his 30s, he doesn't want to drive around a 67 Camaro,
No,
you know, so he's got himself, you know, a Lexus or whatever.
yeah.
And so the market of those is going down and down and
Change.
down.
Well, indeed, one of the things that are popular also, you know, as cars is the complement that comes with it, like the petrol commemorate enamel signs.
Yeah, yeah. In America, it's really
you know,
big.
they're bringing huge prices. You know, oil bottles, jars, and petroleum product type tins and things like that. They're bringing big money now. That you know, we used to discard and throw them away. And they were just sort of things that you wouldn't dream of ever becoming collectible. So a lot of things you didn't have any imagination of what the future was going to bring.
Right.
But you know, antique collecting is an interesting thing, because not only is it a historically interesting thing like that, it's a very social thing. So in the world of collecting, you find other people that collect the same things or have similar interests, and it's around markets and auctions and things like that. You have plenty of friends and people that you share the same enthusiasm and appreciation for the arts and in collectibles and antiques.
You know, like, I think the secret to having a really happy, fulfilling life is to find something you're passionate about, something you love doing,
Yeah.
and being able to make a living off of it. And so it sounds like you pulled that off.
Oh, indeed. Any antique dealer, I would say, is probably a half pie collector. He's not just there for the money. He's there because you have to
Yeah, you
have a
love
love
it,
for it. It's good to, yeah, it's got to be in the heart too. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, Ken. I really appreciate it. Really interesting talking to you, and I hope I get to talk to you again sometime.
I look forward to it. Call me anytime, Mark, and good luck to all your collectors. Make sure you get a good buy. Check it out first, and please contact myself or through Mark anytime I can be of help. I'm more than pleased to be of assistance. Thank you.
Right.